Welcome to D-Lab's basic training on tube guitar amps. Let's see what Fred has in store for us today. Of course, we got Fink, but it appears as though he has one of his toys. A little whistle. It's kind of strange. Look at there. The matching box. Okay, today Fred is going to have us investigate Squeal in these new Fender amplifiers. The Squeal is present in some of the reissues and in the supersonic model behind me. So the three things for you to keep in mind while we're investigating this Squeal: is it the reverb tank? There's many articles saying the guys are discovering positioning of the reverb tank or cables could cause this problem. Is it a bad tube, say a microphonic tube in the reverb string? Or is it a power supply issue? So let's fire up the supersonic. I've got a scope set up. I'll show you guys what this amp is doing. Alright, while I'm warming up the supersonic, let me give you guys a little background. This comes from a local fellow. He said the amp was working fine, and one day it was up on its little tilt mounts and they moved and it fell on its back. After that, they discovered this high-pitched squeal and assumed it was from the fall. So of course the first thing I did was give the amp a visual inspection. I didn't find anything loose. I didn't find anything rolling around inside that could have caused the problem. So right now what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn on the standby. I've got the scope set up. It's looking at the speaker outputs. Okay, I have a little dummy load resistor. So I'm just going to fire it up and watch the scope. You see that? That is the high frequency oscillation that he's hearing, and it's there at all times. And if you move the reverb control, look at there, it increases in amplitude big time. So on the web, this is referred to as a reverb squeal. But when you look at that sine wave, it's actually amplifying a signal. Normally, if it's a squeal, it would be a harsh looking sine wave. This is a pretty clean looking sine wave, and I found that all controls have some effect on it. So that tells me that this problem is not necessarily in the reverb circuit. Alright, so we have our little hit list of possibilities. Number one, was it the reverb tank? Well, I can tell you it's not, because when I pulled the amp out of the chassis, I had to substitute in my own shop reverb tank for testing. So the original is still in the cabinet. Okay. Is it a bad tube? Nope, can't be a bad tube, because this guy recently purchased a complete set of new tubes and he said the problem didn't change. So that narrows us down to the power supply or possibly a bad connection on one of these circuit boards. Or as you guys know, the first thing you should always do with the amp unpowered is a good visual inspection. Check all the connections to the tube pins. Make sure these little ribbon cables have not popped out of place. Just give it a good look over. Look for any kind of arcing or any evidence of problems, like this problem that I'm going to show you right now. So if you look down here, you see this IC filter capacitor? If you look right there at the positive post, there's some goop coming out of it. That tells you that this cap has failed or is getting ready to fail. And if you take a look on the web, you'll see that there's quite a history of defective Illinois capacitors. When I see these in these amplifiers, I routinely just change them out for the customer because I know they're going to fail. So my guess is one of these caps is bad, and the first one I'm going to check is this guy that's leaking. Alright, so what we're going to do, guys, is go ahead and use one of my little LCR meters, and we'll check these caps in circuit. But before you do that, you should always take your voltmeter and verify that these power supplies are dead, because if there's, say, 100 volts on this cap still and you put in your LCR meter, you're going to smoke it. So always make sure that the amp is unplugged and you verify power supplies are dead. Okay, now I've got my nifty little LCR meter. Okay, it's nothing special, but it really does a great job. Let's go to that first cap and see if we got approximately 22 microfarads. I'm on the 200 microfarad scale. So here we are. Look at there. She's wide open. Let's check the one next to it. 23 microfarads. Let's move our way over to the third one here. Try not to get in your way. Also open. How about the one behind it? Yeah, here we go. And that one's okay. So right off the bat, we have two open caps, and I bet you if you were to take a look at your power supply routing, it's probably feeding these preamp tubes. So let's go ahead and substitute in a couple caps and see if the oscillation goes away. Alright, so I've just clipped in a couple F&T 22 microfarad to 500 volt caps. So I've got one across each of the open ones that we just observed. My white is positive. Okay, make sure you get your polarity right, or you're going to have yourself a little confetti generator. Alright, so this is the negative in this case. Yellow, white, once again, is positive. Okay, let's power up the amp. Watch the scope. I have not changed any control settings. We're just going to see if that oscillation goes away. Alright, I'm going to turn on the high voltage. Remember, the reverb was very sensitive. If you look at the scope now, I have nothing. Go full blast on the reverb. You see a little bit of activity. But that was it, guys. That is the source of the squeal. So if you're chasing down one of these oscillations in your amplifier, now you know the first place to look. In all these reissue amps that come through the shop, and I see those gray IC caps, I know for sure that one or all of them are bad, and that's why I normally just replace them. Okay, but in this case I wanted to show you guys some cause and effect. The squeal that people are referring to is actually an oscillation. Okay, if it was reverb squeal, you would probably have a lot of interactance with the tank, but in this case it was affecting the entire amplifier. So that was a power supply problem. What you're actually hearing was a cap that was open and causing an oscillation, or in the radio world we call it motorboating. Okay, so when you get the ripple on the power supply, it gets into these tubes. The tube says, hey, I see a signal, let's amplify it, and they do. So the best advice that D-Lab and Fred have to offer you, if you have one of these amplifiers, you open it up and you see those gray caps and there's any evidence of leakage, change all of them. Don't just change the two that failed, because the others are right behind it and you're going to be back in that amplifier. So if you're enjoying this new basic training series from D-Lab Electronics, do me a favor, guys. Tell your friends. Help me to gain some more subscribers. If you can do that for me, I'll be providing you with many more cool expert service videos from me, Fred, and Fink.